You stand at the threshold of her chamber. The scent of dried lavender clings to the air, faint, brittle, like the memory of a lullaby long buried. Her bed remains untouched, the sheets still creased from the night they dragged her away. You step inside. The silence closes around you like a velvet noose. This is the room where you were born. This is the room where they say you returned. Older, taller, and in love. With her. Your breath catches. You cross the floor slowly. Dust blooms with every step, stirred from years of abandonment. The paintings are gone. The mirror is covered. Only one thing remains. Her rosary, hanging from the window latch, its beads bleached by light, but untarnished. Like her. Or so you tell yourself. Your hand hesitates over the latch. You remember her voice, measured, low, always heavy with meaning. She never told you she loved you. She never had to. Everyone else already had. The courtiers whispered it. The guards chuckled. The priests wrote it down. A mother and her son, sharing more than just blood. You were 14. Now she's dead. Not by sword, not by poison, but by rumor, sharp enough to slice the crown clean from her head. And yet, you did nothing. They said she was too powerful, too intelligent, too close to her son. And that was all it took. History rarely needs proof to write a woman's downfall. Sometimes, a whisper is enough. Welcome to Echoes of the Past. In today's story, we revisit the rise and erasure of a queen whose legacy was shattered not by war, but by rumor. A woman condemned not for what she did, but for what others claimed she desired. Was it truth? Was it political theater? Or was it something far more sinister? A warning to every woman who dared to hold power in a man's world. If stories like these make you pause, question, or feel a chill beneath the skin of history, I'd love for you to subscribe. And if you're watching from somewhere across the world, let me know in the comments. What do your textbooks say about women like her? Because the past may be silent, but it listens. She ruled in the year 1462. The kingdom, once golden under her husband's reign, now trembled on a knife's edge, fractured by rival houses, foreign debt, and a child too young to wear a crown alone. He had died suddenly. They said it was fever. But no one had touched the body, no autopsy, no prayers, just a sealed coffin, a rushed burial, and the strange decision that followed. His queen would rule as regent until their son came of age. It was a dangerous arrangement, because while the title Regina Mater sounded ceremonial, in practice it made her the most powerful person in the land. She signed decrees. She dismissed generals. She sat in court while men bowed low and mumbled resentfully. For a time, she held it all together, with grace, with precision, with terrifying competence. But there was one thing she could not hold back. The court never forgave her for not being a man. They said she was too composed, too private, too educated. They mocked her Latin, her black ink, her habit of reading alone by candlelight. They whispered about how she refused to remarry, even when pressed by nobles who offered up cousins, barons, foreign dukes. She declined them all. She is saving herself, they sneered, for someone. And then there was the boy, the heir, her son, barely a teenager, pale and slight, cloaked in his mother's shadow. He sat beside her in court, but spoke little. He obeyed, he followed, he never questioned her commands. That closeness, too close, became the ember. The court had seen it before. The stories of ancient queens who seduced their sons to hold power were always popular in church sermons and tavern plays. They were familiar, easy, seductive, and most importantly, they were effective. So when the kingdom suffered a drought, and merchants grew restless, and a failed tax levy incited riots in the south, they looked not to policy, but to the woman, and asked, "What is she hiding behind those closed doors?" Rumors became tools. The priests were the first to phrase it in scripture, "When the vine grows twisted, it clings to its own branch." A courtier spoke next. "She spends every evening alone with the boy. No servants are permitted in her wing after dusk." The chancellor followed. "She keeps him from the council. He is 17 now. Why not let him rule?" And then someone said it plainly. One sentence, murmured during a banquet, loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to be denied. "A mother who rules through her son will one day take him entirely." No one laughed, because it no longer sounded absurd. It sounded strategic. What had begun as misogyny had become a weapon. They didn't need proof, only repetition. They needed no witnesses, only a phrase, spoken enough times, in enough places, until even silence felt like guilt. By the time a forged letter appeared, unsigned, unsealed, but alleging carnal corruption within the royal chambers, it no longer mattered whether it was real. The people were ready to believe it. And the queen? She didn't speak. She didn't hold a speech. She didn't defend herself. She didn't weep. That was her mistake. Because silence, in the mouths of men who already feared you, can sound very much like confession. She never wore the crown in public. Not once. It remained locked away in a lacquered box, behind a panel in her study, next to her prayer book, a strand of her husband's hair, and a wax-sealed letter no one had ever dared open. But make no mistake, she ruled. Every edict bore her signature. Every royal seal was hers to press. She met with envoys behind closed doors, negotiated borders, annulled corrupt marriages, raised new taxes. And when winter came early and the southern provinces starved, it was her granaries that fed them. People called her cold, unmotherly. They didn't see the hours she spent in the infirmary wing, reading harvest reports, or scrubbing blood from the soldiers' sheets with her own hands. They didn't see the way she looked at her son, not as a boy, but as the future, something sacred, something unfinished. And so she guarded him, from the court, from war, from women. He had no tutors, only private lessons, overseen by her. No friends, save for a cousin who died young, and no voice in council, even as he grew tall enough to look her in the eyes. He never looked her in the eyes. He studied quietly, rode horses alone, sat at feasts like a ghost. People noticed. She is hiding him. He is weak. He is hers. It arrived with no sender. Just a folded parchment, stained with red wax, slipped into the pocket of the Bishop of Seoul during morning prayer. It was brief, chillingly so. The boy does not sleep in his own room. The queen dismisses all servants by nightfall. I have heard sounds no mother should make with her son. No one signed it, no one verified it, and yet it passed from hand to hand, growing heavier each time. By the third day, the chancellor called for an inquiry. By the fifth, the archbishop demanded the queen step aside. She refused. Her son said nothing. He stood at her side as the council questioned her, his face blank, his voice absent. When asked if he had anything to declare, he blinked once, lips pressed tight. And history would record that moment not as silence, but as betrayal. The court moved quickly. Quarters were separated. Her personal guard disbanded. Her private confessor exiled. Every decision she made was now subject to approval. She left her seal untouched. Let them govern, if they think they can. But they didn't want to govern. They wanted her gone. In the final months, she saw almost no one. Even her son, now crowned king in name, not power, was kept from her. When she passed through corridors, courtiers stopped speaking. She learned to listen instead. The kitchens whispered she slept naked now, waiting for him. The scribes claimed she had read too much about the pharaohs, how they bred within their bloodlines to preserve divine right. A play was staged anonymously in a southern province. A queen who gives birth to a boy and then marries him under moonlight. The crowd laughed. No one dared censor it. She requested to see her son. He declined. She requested again. No answer. And then one morning the guards arrived, not to kill her, but to move her. Gently, formally, like one might handle an icon turned heretical. She left without a sound. No handmaidens, no ceremony. Her chambers were sealed, her portraits taken down. The crown remained, locked in its lacquered box, untouched. They didn't hang her. They didn't poison her. They did something worse. They made her a story, a cautionary tale, a shadow in every hall where a woman dared raise her voice. They found her at dawn, not dead, not mad, simply still, wrapped in a faded velvet robe, seated upright in a chair beside the window of her exile chamber. Her eyes open, fixed on the frost gathering along the glass. Her fingers rested on her lap, one hand clasping the other as if in prayer or apology. There was no letter, no message, just a final detail the maid could never forget. A pair of worn slippers set neatly by the door, hers and a much smaller pair, long outgrown. The official cause of death was listed as melancholia, unspoken, unwritten, but understood by all. She could not live without him. But of course, she had lived without him for years. It was he who had disappeared. First emotionally, then politically, and finally, entirely. He ruled from afar, never returning to her wing of the palace, never speaking her name aloud again. The coronation came 2 weeks later. No mention of the Queen Dowager. No mourning banners, no public rites. In the royal archives, her portraits were removed, her edicts unsigned. The lacquered box that held the crown was broken open, the diadem lifted out as if it had never belonged to her hands. Her name vanished from the liturgical calendar. Her seal melted down. Only one record remained. A court clerk, perhaps out of mercy or carelessness, preserved a single page from her private ledger. One line, undated, scrawled hastily in her own hand. There is no greater lie than the truth no one will hear. She became a myth, a subject for whispered warnings to future queens. Don't be too clever. Don't rule too long, and never keep your son too close. The people remembered her, but not her laws, not her reforms. Only the rumor, the one that never had to be proven, the one that outlived her. And what of the boy? He reigned for 17 years, never married, no heirs. He died in silence, surrounded by ministers who claimed to serve him, but served only the memory of what they'd destroyed to place him there. History closed around the queen like a grave, not shallow, not hurried, but deep, deliberate. They didn't bury her with violence. They buried her with suggestion, with artful omissions, with just enough ink to leave a stain. Some stories are not preserved. They are sculpted, deliberately, methodically, until the sharpest parts are smoothed and the ugliest truths hidden beneath beautiful lies. This queen's story is not rare. It is simply well executed. Because throughout history, powerful women have always faced the same method of erasure, not by the sword, but by sexual slander. When their minds were too sharp, their voices too steady, or their refusal to bend too persistent, society did not accuse them of treason. It accused them of desire. It is a formula as old as empire. Reduce a woman's strength to sin. Make her ambition unnatural. Make her love, especially for her child, something grotesque. Ask yourself, what would have happened if this queen had been a man? If a king had shielded his daughter, kept her close, educated her personally, and refused to remarry, would the court have whispered incest? Or would they have called it noble? Even now, in boardrooms, in politics, in culture, the tactic remains. Discredit the woman by distorting her relationships. Turn professionalism into promiscuity. Turn motherhood into manipulation. Turn silence into guilt. And perhaps, most dangerously, let the accusation stand unchallenged. Because as long as it might be true, it doesn't have to be. History is not written by the victors. It's written by those who survived the Whisper campaign. And she didn't. In a forgotten wing of the palace, the chamber where she once ruled still stands. Dust thickens along the drapes. A cracked mirror rests against the wall, warped by time. And if you look into it, long enough, quietly enough, you might not see yourself. You might see a woman seated in shadow, a crown at her feet, a boy turning away. You might hear nothing at all, except the faint echo of a name never spoken again. That is the price of rumor. It does not just erase, it replaces. Thank you for listening to this story. Have you ever heard of a queen erased not by war, but by a whisper? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe there are more names worth remembering, more truths worth recovering, I'd be honored to have you join me here, in the quiet. Until next time.